So, I'm very glad to be here at what is my second contact in the desert time. For some of you it's the third, for some the first. I know that they are building a really great event here, and I think we should support them all in every way we can. I think we're in at the beginning of something truly special here, and I know that Victoria, Paul, and everyone else who's worked so hard on this are really trying to, they're in this for the long haul. They want this event to grow year on year, to get better and better and bigger, and to play a real part in all this process. So thank you to all the organizers and things. And so I am going to talk about what I believe is arguably the world's best documented and most compelling UFO incident. And I always have a little bit of a battle with the Roswell folks, and they tell me no, Roswell's the biggest and most important case, and they say, well, you just watch it. We'll bring out some really compelling evidence on Roswell, and the whole world will pay attention. And I think we had something like that last month in Mexico. But anyway, so I'm going to stick with Rendlesham Forest. Thank you. Great. I'm going to stick with the Rendlesham Forest. And now, how many of you here are familiar with the case? That's great. And how many are not? Oh, okay. So, right. This is my excuse to at least do a kind of Rendlesham 101 overview. Rendlesham Forest is in the United Kingdom, and it lies between the twin bases of Bentwaters and Woodbridge. Now, these were United States Air Force bases on British soil, part of the wider American military presence in Europe, which was, of course, so necessary during the Second World War and after the Second World War as it spilled over into the Cold War. And frankly, without the power and numbers of the American military, there was little to stop the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact just rolling across the German plains with their tanks. And the world would have been a very different place. So, for many years, there was a huge American military presence in Europe, in the United Kingdom. There still is a presence, but obviously it's being drawn down now. And Rendlesham Forest is effectively where this super compelling case unfolded. And events started on the Christmas period in December 1980. And this was a time of some huge international tension. The Polish trade union Solidarity, headed by Lech Walesa, was rising in power. And there was a real challenge to the Polish the puppet communist government of General Jaruzelski. And the true story of this Cold War period has not yet emerged, but I certainly believe, and a number of historians feel, that aside from the Cuban Missile Crisis, what actually occurred with Solidarity was probably the biggest potential flashpoint for World War III and perhaps nuclear Armageddon that we've faced. So really second only to the Cuban Missile Crisis. And yet, unlike the Cuban Missile Crisis, the full story of what happened with Poland has not yet been told. And I'm certainly not, I'm not a historian, so I'm not really intellectually equipped to tell the story in the proper sense, but there is some strong evidence to suggest that with the power of Solidarity rising, the Soviet government of the then President Leonid Brezhnev effectively told the government of General Jaruzelski, if you do not deal with this solidarity problem yourselves and stamp down on it and nip it in the bud and crush it, we will come in and crush it for you. And you know what that means. So effectively, that was a threat that the Soviets would just send the tanks over. And had they done that, it's certainly possible that the West would have responded and things would have escalated and we would have been in a nuclear war situation. The Soviets had a series of exercises called Soyuz. And Soyuz 1980 was scheduled to begin, I believe, on December the 8th, 1980, shortly before the events unfolded in Rendlesham Forest. And certainly there are historians who believe that Soyuz 1980 was going to be the cover for the real Soviet invasion or suppression of the dissent in Poland. And the reason I'm getting into this is we have actually got quite a lot of time in this presentation. And I think it's important, before I tell the story of the Rendlesham Forest incident, to give you the geopolitical background so that you can see the events that were unfolding on the world stage, and that I think will then put Rendlesham into a proper context, which might be helpful. So that was the situation. As we all now know with hindsight, that did not come to pass. For whatever reason, the Poles convinced the Soviets that they had it in hand. The meeting that Lech Walesa had with the Pope had not yet happened. That was to take place in early 1981. And it looked as if the window for Soviet invasion had maybe closed by then, because events had built up a momentum of their own. But there was certainly a very real danger, and intelligence analysts and therefore political leaders in the West would have known full well through intelligence sources. And there was a very highly placed Polish military officer who was in fact passing information to the United States that ended up with the CIA.
One pertinent part is Ronald Reagan had just been elected president.
Indeed. That is completely to the point. And yes, I was going to say, please feel free to be interactive with this. I don't want this to be necessarily one of these lectures where I talk at you for the whole time. So do feel free to interject and shout out.
I'm trying to get a mic also, okay?
Okay.
Because it will not make the DVD.
But that's a very important point. The US presidential election had taken place, of course, at the tail end of 1980. And Ronald Reagan had been elected on what was clearly going to be a hard-line ticket. He had made no secret of his views that the Soviet Union was what he would later go on to describe as the evil empire. And the fact that Reagan elected, but not yet, of course, inaugurated when the Rendlesham Forest incident took place, was to form a partnership with another Western leader whose hardline views on the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact were legendary, namely Margaret Thatcher, Prime Minister of the UK. This double act of Reagan and Thatcher was something, in terms of its hardline attitude, it was something that the Soviet Union had not faced for some time. I don't want to speak ill of previous political leaders, but I don't think the Soviet leadership felt that they really had much to worry about with some of the previous ones. But with Reagan and Thatcher, they realized, they knew full well, and of course history was to prove them right, that they would face Western leaders of steel and resolve, the likes of which they had not seen for a long, long time. So it was clearly a transitionary phase in sort of the geopolitical situation. So in the early hours of December 26th, 1980, security police and law enforcement personnel at the twin bases of Bent Waters and Woodbridge. And they're very, very close. I mentioned that Rendlesham Forest lies between them. Because Bent Waters and Woodbridge are so close geographically, they are treated as a unified command. They were colloquially known as the twin bases. So the wing commander, Gordon Williams, at the time, was effectively the commanding officer of both Bent Waters and Woodbridge. So strange lights were seen, and the security police and law enforcement personnel believed that an aircraft had crashed in the forest and maybe started a fire. Now, they knew that it wasn't a military aircraft because they knew that they had nothing up flying, and they were quickly checking. This was the early hours of Boxing Day. There was really little military activity going on. But they thought that perhaps a civilian light aircraft might have come down. So they wanted to get out there and render assistance and see what was going on. So a patrol was thrown together, and a number of people went out from the east gate into the forest and went to investigate. I should also say that I should say a little bit about the twin bases. There are some things that I can say about them. There are some things that I can't say about them. They were certainly as home to the 81st Tactical Fighter Wing, where a lot of A-10 aircraft were based. This was one of the most strategically important bases in NATO, because what would have happened at a time of international tension is that the A-10s would have deployed forward to Germany, and those aircraft, of course, if we started with a conventional conflict, and doctrine suggested that unless you went to a nuclear conflict, you would start, literally, as I mentioned earlier, with tanks rolling towards the west across the German plains. And those A-10 tank buster aircraft, of course, would have been very much, literally, in the front line to try and turn back that tide of red armor. Otherwise, the whole West would have been overwhelmed. So this was clearly, these were twin bases with a very important mission. And of course,
Was it ever publicly acknowledged that they
were nuclear? We have gotten 10 or 15 minutes in, and the nuclear question has been asked, as I knew it would be. So that, is that coming out onto the? Have we lost the?
I don't have a monitor, so sometimes you're going to have to tell me next slide.
Oh, right.
I don't have a monitor
Okay.
to preview it.
Next slide, please. Okay, and next slide, please. And next slide, please. Okay, so that. Now, pardon me?
Mike Renner.
But I'm going to help you through this by reading something.
I understand that you, Mr. Pope, may not be able to answer that, but I can. But I can answer that. I was stationed at the nearby Lakenheath Air Base for 3 years as a major in the Air Force, and the answer to the question is yes. Bent Waters Woodbridge did have nuclear weapons storage area at that time, and subsequently, as did Lakenheath. The A-10 is nuclear capable aircraft, and doctrine at that time was for any major Warsaw Front move through the Fulda Gap or otherwise during this height of the Cold War, and Mr. Pope's very accurate to talk about how tense it was, that there would be little chance that a major Soviet incursion from Eastern Europe into the West could be stopped without the use of nuclear weapons. And so the 81st Fighter Wing, as with the F-111B fighter bombers close by at Lake and Heath, were nuclear capable, and they had weapons in a weapons storage area. So that saves you from your security clearance issue. I'm not bound by that, but I'm happy to help.
Thank you. You have saved me from jail there. Joking aside, I checked the position on this when I was writing the book on this. I said to the Ministry of Defence, where I worked for 21 years, I had left in 2006, I checked back with the press office there, and I said, look, this is coming up in the book, and it's also something that I get asked regularly at lectures and conferences. Is this now a little quaint piece of Cold War history that we can talk about, or do I have to... It's gone again. Do I have to stick to that party line? And I was told, no, you have to stick to that line still. But as well as what the gentleman kindly helped us out with here, there was a former Chief of the Defence Staff in the United Kingdom, Admiral of the Fleet, the Lord Hill Norton, 5-star Admiral of the Royal Navy, who was very bullish, outspoken on the UFO issue. And Lord Hill Norton said about this, and this is a direct quote from a letter that he wrote to one of the Under-Secretaries of State at the Ministry of Defence. And he, writing about the Rendlesham Forest incident, said, this is a direct quote, "My position, both privately and publicly expressed over the last dozen years or more, is that there are only two possibilities. Either, A, an intrusion into our airspace and a landing by unidentified craft took place at Rendlesham as described, or B, the Deputy Commander of an operational nuclear-armed US Air Force base in England, and a large number of his enlisted men were either hallucinating or lying." He went on to say, and in either of those events, this simply must be of defence significance. How could it not be of any defence significance? And something that we'll come up against as I go on with this is that the Ministry of Defence, which for those of you who don't know, is effectively, it's a Department of State and also a military headquarters, and it's broadly the equivalent of your DOD. I worked for them for 21 years in a variety of different posts. My time on their UFO project was from 1991 to 1994. I did a whole bunch of other things before and after. But the Ministry of Defence is, as I say, the equivalent of the DOD. So,
Did you work for them as a civilian?
yes, I was never a serving military officer. I was a civilian employee, and I worked obviously very closely with both civilians and military officers, military police officers, intelligence specialists. Ministry of Defence main building, where I worked in the heart of London, was a real microcosm for the defence industry, because basically we had a whole mixture of defence civilian employees like myself, Navy, Army, Air Force, Marines, defence intelligence staff, and a few other people here and there. It was fascinating times. Next slide, please. Okay, this is I'm going to get on to some of the players in this, but just before I go on to tell the story, it's worth just showing a few of the people who were involved. On the left, we have Jim Penniston. On the right, we have John Burroughs. In the middle, of course, we have Linda Moulton Howe, who has been one of the great champions of this story over the years, and who has put in a lot of very hard work and things, and it's only fair that after that hard work you get to unwind with a drink. Can we? Why do they keep going back? Can we?
Because it's not interesting to leave it on all the time.
Well, can?
You'd like to see your
Yeah.
face and talk, people get a chance and I go back to it.
Okay. Okay. So, we have the early hours of December 26th, 1980, and we have these strange lights. John Burroughs, Jim Penniston, Ed Kavanasak, a number of other people drive out into the forest to investigate these strange lights, and they find not a crashed aircraft as they had expected to find, but a landed UFO. And in fact, can we have the next slide, please? Just to show you that that's happy people. We always have happy people in the UFO community. Let's show some more happy people in the UFO community, just to show how happy everyone is in this subject. Next slide, please.
You're in control of that. I have no control over
okay.
the slideshow.
Next slide. There we are.
If I did,
Happy.
I would have to ask you
Okay.
to slide.
Happy people in ufology. That is myself, Jim Penniston again, and Charles Holt that we see on the right-hand side. Charles Holt was the deputy base commander. He's going to go on to play a big part in all of this. And that is John and Jim back at Bentwaters. I may skip through some of these, actually. So this is the sketch of the craft. This is an important one. This is Jim Penniston's sketch of what he encountered. And I don't think there's very much middle ground with something like that. We talk about most UFO sightings being aircraft lights, weather balloons, meteors, and indeed that's the case. But when a serving United States Air Force officer draws that in his police notebook and says, this is what I, as somebody who was highly trained in aircraft recognition, I mean anything, whether it was American, British, Soviet, Warsaw Pact, this guy, Jim Penniston, was a real deep specialist in that. And this is his sketch of it. He said it was about 9 feet across at the base, maybe 9 feet high. And with a lot of these sorts of things, people say, could any of this be some secret prototype aircraft or drone? I mean, of course, that's one of the logical theories with something like that. And indeed, there are such things. By the way, it's a possibility. Here's a quiz for you. What sci-fi movie is that still from?
The Earth Stood Still.
Day the Earth Stood Still? Any other ideas? Close Encounters? Independence Day? It's not. It is not. It is real. And it's called Taranis. It's a British drone. Hurrah, the Brits are still in the game. Americans obviously do, I think, lead the world in a lot of things, but it's good to see that the Brits are still in the game. This is, as I say, it's codenamed Taranis, after the Celtic god of thunder. And one day that will be probably dropping ordnance on the bad guys. It's the next generation drone. They are just about flying that now.
What's the size of that?
That one, I don't have the dimensions, but I'm not whistleblowing here. Okay. That still was taken from the Ministry of Defense website. So Britannia still does maybe not rule the waves, but maybe the skies. And next one, please. Yeah, there we go. That is also from the Ministry of Defense website. That is a next generation drone, which is going to be an Anglo-French project. So clearly there are a lot of things flying. I mean, you've got to figure, as many of you with Air Force and aviation industry backgrounds know, at any given time there are things flying that you won't see at the Farnborough Paris Air Show or in the aviation press for 10, 15 years or so. We all know, of course, looking back now, that stealth fighters and bombers were flying for years before, as most things do. So, we have to ask ourselves, of course, with all of this, are we dealing with some sort of secret prototype aircrafts and drones? But Jim Penniston did not just see this craft, he saw strange symbols on the side of it. This is his original police notebook, and this is a still from it. His hand was kind of shaking, as you can imagine. You encounter this thing in a small clearing in the forest, and your adrenaline levels are kind of kicking in. So that is his original sketch, and then when he kind of sat down and cleaned it up and thought about it and tried to recreate it without the handshake, this was what he came up with. And he walked around this craft. He did a full survey of it. He touched it. And I'm going to come back to that later, because there's a part of the story that we'll get to a little later in all of this. But, again, he said this was vaguely reminiscent to him of Egyptian hieroglyphs. He really just didn't know what else to say. But clearly, it's not Cyrillic alphabet. So he was at a complete loss. I'll go back to that. So I'm going to talk a little bit for no slides. So he walked around this craft for some time. Now, their perception of time out there was a little bit garbled. And it's an interesting facet of this case, I think, that amongst all the people that went into the forest on that first night, they all came back with slightly different recollections and experiences. Now, part of that, I'm sure, is attributable to human variation. People have different characters, people have different memories, people have different perceptions of events. But to me, it seems as if something a little bit more than that was going on. There was certainly interference of a more physical nature going on in terms of the radios. They went out there with their radios. They were line of sight. They worked very well. And yet, as they approached the UFO, as they went out into the forest towards this small clearing where the craft was landed, these normally reliable radios started to cut out. And indeed, for a while, John Burroughs, Jim Penniston were out of touch with the base. And what they did is they created a radio relay by leaving personnel at various points. So, a lot of people actually went out into the forest, but one of them was left back at the Jeep, where the Jeep got, where it was, you could no longer drive it out into the forest because the trees were too closely packed. So one of them stayed back at the Jeep. One of them went forward, that guy called Ed Kavanasak, who was very, very traumatized by this whole incident and by the aftermath. And one of the people, by the way, had said earlier, when they were talking about this, and they said, where do you think it crashed? And he said, it didn't crash, it landed. And when they tried to quiz him more, it was almost like he was in shock. And I mean, these are highly trained men and women in the military, many of them years of service, and yet they come up against something the likes of which they've never seen and experienced before. So Jim walks around this thing for a while. He's not quite aware of where John is. John is slightly back. And Jim touches the craft at one point. He touches the side of this thing. He actually touches one of the symbols. And they kind of light up a little bit. And then this thing slowly rises up above the ground. It clears the canopy of the trees, but it's a very tight fit. I mean, people talk about this in TV documentaries as if it's a big clearing. I don't know, how many of you have seen TV show recreations of this. Well, yeah, they tend to kind of over-exaggerate the size of the clearing, like it's a big thing. In fact, Jim estimated that the craft was only around 9 feet across, and he said that was a pretty tight fit. There was not much room on either side of this. And when this thing maneuvered upwards, it actually smashed some branches off the trees, and it seemed to have maybe smashed some branches on its way in, which they didn't see. And the moment it cleared the tops of the trees, from this very, very slow speed, and for a second it hovered, and then, you know what's coming next, it just shot away to the horizon. And Jim wrote in his police notebook, he was taking notes all the time, he just wrote the words, "Speed, impossible." I mean, this was a guy, as I say, stationed at these twin bases, skilled. One of his skill sets was aircraft recognition. And yet he said, well, this was just orders of magnitude above and beyond anything that he'd ever seen and even conceived of before. There was a flash of light. At one point, John Burroughs was down. Jim thought maybe he was dead at one point, that he'd been hit by the flash of this thing, whatever it was. John has a different recollection, and indeed one of the other witnesses who saw John at the time said, John went into the light. Now, I don't know what that necessarily means or entails. John doesn't know for sure. These people are honest guys. They say, look, we don't really know what happened to us. Yeah.
This might be a good point to ask Mr. Pope. How reliable are these stories? I know that Linda interviewed people. We're getting a certain commander said some things. What is the chance, you know you were in this area of government, that they were debriefed on this using drugs or certain techniques so that we're not getting a fully reliable report?
It's a great question, and I think it is certainly. Firstly, let me back it up and say, let me speak to John and Jim's personal credibility. I think I've spent a good deal of time with both of them, and indeed with probably over the years several dozen of the other major players in this, including General Gordon Williams and Colonel Charles Holt. All of whom take a slightly different view on all this, but I have no doubt whatsoever of the personal integrity of the witnesses involved. And indeed, I know that one of the things that Jim, who had a very high security clearance at the time, John had a high security clearance later, but he was comparatively recently in compared to Jim. Jim had gone through, now what is it they call it? I think the Personnel Reliability Program, PRP. Any of you people ex-USAF, correct me on that. Is it PRP?
Yes, it's Personnel Reliability Program. Anyone who comes in contact with nuclear weapons, an airframe that can carry nuclear weapons, or treats nuclear weapons personnel like a flight surgeon has to be part of that Personnel Reliability Program.
Right. So Jim Peniston certainly was part of that Personnel Reliability Program, and indeed, you know, they all knew what they were dealing with at the bases. So the chain of command, you know, everyone was always, you know, on monitoring everyone else. If anyone had displayed any strange behavior, they would have been off duty, and particularly, of course, for those people on the PRP like Jim, they would have in an instant been taken away from their particular duties. So I have no doubt whatsoever about the personal integrity of these witnesses. But I want to read, which speaks to the second half of your question, I want to read something that Colonel Holt wrote comparatively recently about this. And he said, let me find this. Okay. Bear with me a moment. Suffice to say that you are entirely correct. There have been persistent allegations over the years that there were aggressive debriefings that took place involving the use of hypnosis and drugs. And here we are. I've now found the quote from Colonel Charles Holt. And Colonel Holt, of course, was the deputy base commander. So his words on this, I think, do carry a good deal of weight and authority. And this is his quote. Office of Special Investigations operatives harshly interrogated 5 young airmen, some of them in shock at the time, who were key witnesses. And he went on to write, drugs such as sodium pentothal, often called a truth serum, when used with some form of brainwashing or hypnosis, were administered during these interrogations. And the whole thing has had a damaging and lasting effect on the men involved. So, yes, I take your point entirely. It is difficult to be certain that now, not least with the fact that we're over 30 years on, and I mean, if that wasn't enough in of itself, add to that the possibility that aggressive debriefings with drugs and hypnosis have been used. And by the way, somebody said to me fairly recently, do we know that Air Force Office of Special Investigations were using those sorts of techniques back in 1980? Surely this sort of thing was stamped out after the Church inquiry. And I actually found an Air Force Office of Special Investigations training manual. It's available on the internet, released under FOI, dated contemporaneously to the Rendlesham Forest incident. So we're after Church. And it goes on to say, any AFOSI operative wanting to use drugs or hypnosis in the course of an investigation should take that request up the chain of command. Well, self-evidently, you wouldn't have that in the manual if the answer was you're not going to use those. It would simply say those techniques are prohibited. And that, I think, was news to a lot of people.
Hey, Nick, I have a question. Over here.
Who would have made the decision to administer pentothal?
Okay, question. Who would have made the decision to administer sodium pentothal? I don't know the answer to that. I would have thought that the senior AFOSI officer assigned to the twin bases would be the one who would probably make the request. His name, I believe, was Wayne Persinger. Now, whether he made that request and whether it went up the chain of command and who that would have involved, I don't know. So I don't know, for example, whether Colonel Holt said that he was never asked. And he was deputy base commander. Gordon Williams, he has had 1 or 2 memory issues over the years due to some medical issues. But
Nick, I have a question.
Sure.
Right here. I know that there's some reports of possibility that the men were not just debriefed by OSI, but possible Men in Black type characters. Is that true or not? One of the witnesses saying that remember them saying they were from DS8. And then also, what is the correlation with possible entities being seen? Is that true or not in this story?
Let me take the second question first. There are very few people who are involved in this. And overall, there are many dozens of people. There are some civilian witnesses too, but most of the witnesses were serving United States Air Force personnel. Very few of those people say that they saw entities. I believe Larry Warren is about the only one, and possibly Adrian Bustinza has hinted that there were shadowy shapes that might have been entities. So there are few of them, and certainly John Burroughs, Jim Peniston, Charles Holt, so the main players in the story that I'm going to tell, never saw any entities. With regards this recollection of shadowy Men in Black type people being involved in the interrogation, this kind of, Jim put me in a very difficult position with that recollection, because DS8 stands for Defense Secretariat 8, and it's actually a Ministry of Defense division, and it's the division where I used to work. Now, DS8 was its previous title, and when I joined that section, I did that job from 91 through to 94. By that time, the division had retitled itself SEC-AS, Secretariat Air Staff, but before that it had been DS8. So Jim, my friend and research partner and co-author, was effectively accusing my own organization of having been involved in this cover-up. And I said, Jim, I have no knowledge of that. I've seen nothing in the files. It's possible that that was a confabulated memory, because I think that some of Jim's recollections have emerged under regression hypnosis, but certainly by no means all. But I think that part about DS8 did come out. All his recollections of the craft, conscious memory. DS8, I believe, was regression hypnosis. And, of course, there are problems with regression hypnosis in terms of what's called confabulation, wanting perhaps to tell a story that they think will please the hypnotherapist, perhaps jumbling memories and things that they've seen previously. So I can't really speak to whether that is true or not, but Jim certainly believes that there were multiple agencies involved in the interrogation, and indeed Colonel Holt believes that too. I mean, I think sometimes people don't realize just how conspiratorial Colonel Holt, as one of the senior officers, is on this issue now, looking back. I mean, he's furious about all of this because, of course, his view is that he was deputy base commander and that as one of the senior base officers, he had a duty of care, which he did, to the women and men under his command. And he feels that the fact that this happened under his watch reflects badly on him. So I think he's been unfair to himself, but he's pretty fired up about all of this. Mm-hmm.
Just want to clarify, maybe ask something with you to the person who asked about the interrogation. I do have ongoing communications with both John and Jim. And what I understand from them is that the OSI did not really investigate them until February, and this happened at the end of December.
Right.
So all those memories and things that they had prior to it were not affected by any of the drugs or the interrogation treatment.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. And I mean, I should say that Colonel Holt kind of spoke about this in the aftermath, and he said to me years later, he said, Nick, people were coming and going onto the base like I've never seen before in my Air Force career. It's like they had a kind of access all areas backstage pass that they could walk into, the Rolling Stones dressing room or something. It was like, you can imagine right at the beginning of this presentation, I set out a little bit about the geopolitical situation, about the mission of the bases. Security is pretty tight and integral to the whole mission. And yet, Colonel Holt says that people who he didn't know, had no idea who they were just breezing in and out, taking items relating to the investigation, and I'll come on to that, speaking to people, doing what they liked. And it was like no one could challenge these people. Yes?
In relation to your oath of secrecy, were there any part of Jim or John's testimony that you had to keep out because you would infringe on your oath?
I don't think I can really comment on anything. I don't think I can really comment too much on the security vetting process in its entirety. What I will say is that I think all three of us took the view that we are not whistleblowers, that we remain loyal to our countries and our former employers, and we want to do the right thing. We know that people are interested in this, but we don't want to, whether deliberately or even inadvertently, break our security oaths. So what I will say is that we self-censored, I think, quite a lot. Particularly on the nuclear question. We knew that there were certain things that, and I think we say somewhere in the book, we now come to a difficult point. And we go on to explain that we can't really comment on that. But I think through the courage of people who are prepared to speak out and through just general piecing together, I think even if we won't say those things, you can get a good idea of what's involved. But with apologies, I don't think any of us are supposed to discuss the details of what goes in, what stays out, that sort of thing. Yes, in the front. Can we have the mic up here, please?
Since the MOD finally admitted that there was, 7 or 8 files remaining that they were going to release, what's taking so long between that admission and finally having those records become released?
Okay, this is an interesting question, and it goes wider than Rendlesham, but I think it is worth my spending a few minutes on this. The British government, as many of you know, is in the process of declassifying and releasing its entire archive of UFO files. And for years and years, the MOD told Parliament, the media, and the public that the UFO phenomenon was of very limited interest to the Ministry of Defence, and hardly any resources were put into it, and very little time was spent on this, and the whole phenomenon was assessed as being, and this is the quote, no defence significance. The whole thing is written off in those 3 words, no defence significance, or sometimes a variation on it, no defence interest. Self-evidently, that can't be true. And indeed, when the British government introduced its Freedom of Information Act, it transpired that the Ministry of Defence received more FOI requests on UFOs than any other single subject. And for that reason decided, rather than responding on a case-by-case basis, they would proactively open the files. And to date, on this subject, on which there is no defence interest, guess how many documents they found? 52,000 documents, some of which were classified secret UK eyes only. These documents have been released in 10 batches, starting in May 2008. The last one was June 2013, and you may have seen me go on various programs each time they released a batch. I've discussed this on Good Morning America, on Nightline, on Geraldo Live, on Joy Behar, CNN News, whatever. In June 2013, when the so-called final batch was released, they said, right, there it is, that's it, hope you enjoyed it. Move along, there's nothing to see. And then actually, through the persistence of John Burroughs, making requests for things that he thought should be there and weren't in the files, the Ministry of Defence turned around and said, oops, we've made a mistake. We've found 18 more files, and each file can contain several hundred documents. So this statement that all the documents had been released, which the Ministry of Defence proudly announced to the world's media, was followed by except for the ones we haven't released. A member of the House of Lords asked a question in Parliament about this about 2 months ago. And he was told, he asked, well, look, what's happened to these 18 files that when you confessed last year that you'd found them, you said they would be released to the National Archives by the end of 2014, and they would be released to the public 2015. Well, we're 2015, how are things going? And the answer came back, well, we haven't even transferred them from the Ministry of Defense to the National Archives yet. And it's, well, how many of them have you transferred? Well, none. And when do you think they might go to the National Archives? Oh, well, maybe 2016. And then when do the public and the media get them? Well, maybe 2017. So it goes on and on and on. The more media and parliamentary pressure there is on this, the more it maybe might force people to get a move on. So sometimes it helps when there are news stories about this, and when, of course, you can't just ask a question in Parliament. You have to get a member of Parliament or a member of the House of Lords to actually ask a formal question, to ask Her Majesty's government when these files will be released. But fortunately, there is a member of the House of Lords called Lord Black, who was courageous enough to say, I will ask this question of the British government. And if anyone tries to ridicule me with this, I will say, I am looking at this from the perspective of it being an open government and a freedom of information issue. So all credit to Lord Black for having done that. I know in Britain the House of Lords is quite controversial in terms of whether it's really something a modern democracy should have. But the House of Lords does sometimes act as a check on the House of Commons and does often hold the government to account on all this. So I think that was a good thing. Let me dip back into the story of Rendlesham Forest. So I got to the point where Jim had touched the craft and it had taken off and shot away. They returned shell-shocked to the base. They found it was about 45 minutes later than they believed it should have been, and indeed personnel at the base had been on the point of throwing together another party and going out to look for them. But they got back just in time to prevent this from happening. There was a second night of activity, which I'm not going to discuss in great detail. I think Linda Moulton-Howe has done a lot of work on this, and I know that for those of you who are here on Monday, Linda will be giving a presentation on this, I think at 8:30, and I would encourage any of you who are able to go to hear Linda's take on this. But there was a second night, and it involved the main issue on this was that, again, strange lights were seen in the forest, and at one point a ball of light travelled through the cab of one of the military vehicles, through the open window of one side, out the other. And one of the officers who witnessed this was so traumatized that they were actually taken off duty for a while, literally in shock. On the third night of activity, there was an awards ceremony taking place at Woody's, and this is on base, and the doors burst open, and an officer comes in looking very flustered, and he comes up to the base commander and the deputy base commander, so Ted Conrad and Charles Holt, and he says, "Sir, it's back." And Holt and Conrad are kind of, looking perplexed and looking at each other and looking at why is the lieutenant so flustered? What's back? What's back? They ask. And he said, "The UFO, sir. The UFO has returned." Of course, the senior officers knew that an event had happened, and they were not pleased about this situation. They felt that it was detrimental to the smooth running of the twin bases, and Conrad, basically as the senior officer present, turned to Holt and said, you deal with this. And Holt went out into the forest, and in his words, he went out to put this whole UFO nonsense to bed for once and for all. He said, I want to debunk this UFO nonsense, this hysteria, and go out there, and once we've dealt with this and we've seen what it is, I want no more talk of this, and that should be an end of the matter. Well, he was not able to debunk it. He was literally walking into history, and he ended up a witness to this, and remains to date one of the most senior serving military officers to see and report a UFO whilst on duty. And the first thing that happened is Holt threw together a team of people, about half a dozen, and he said, I want to go out into the forest, see what's going on. To do that, he said, let's light this whole place up. And to do that, he wanted to use light alls, which are basically powerful banks of lights mounted on the back of a trailer or a flatbed truck. They're used often by engineers to light up when they're doing aircraft maintenance in hangars so that they've got good light. Holt said, get the light alls, drive them out into the forest. If there's anything in the forest, we're going to light this baby up, and anything in there, we're going to be able to see it and flush it out. So the light alls are basically going out into the forest, and then, like the radios on the first night, all these light alls kind of splutter and die. And Holt is furious, and he's running around, and he thinks they're not fueled up properly or something, and he's shouting orders, and everyone's running around like headless chickens, and they're going back to the base maintenance depot, and we have a witness there who said that he'd never seen anything like it, with so many light alls coming back in, being checked, being prepped, fueled, going back out. He said it was like the biggest NATO exercise he's ever taken part in, only something was going on for real out in the forest, and all these people were running around not knowing what was happening. So while Holt was waiting for the light alls to be sorted out, he thought, well, I'll go back to the clearing where this was seen on the first night. Let's do next slide, please, actually. That's Margaret Thatcher with Georgina Bruni. And I'll just briefly tell that story before I go on. They met, and Georgina asked Margaret Thatcher, what do you know about UFOs, and what do you know about Rendlesham? And Margaret Thatcher said, you must have the facts right, and you can't tell the people. And Georgina Bruni, who's a socialite, she mixed with high-level political leaders, diplomats, and government types, but she also was interested in the UFO issue. And she said, what do you mean? And Margaret Thatcher simply repeated her thing. You must have your facts right, and you can't tell the people. Did she mean there is, there's a reasonable explanation for this, but people just won't believe it? Or did she mean with the phrase, you can't tell the people, that there's some great, profound, terrible, paradigm-changing truth that would just be too much for people? I don't know. And sadly, of course, Georgina Bruni died some years ago, and Margaret Thatcher died more recently. And that particular secret, I'm afraid, of what was meant by that conversation has been taken to the grave. Next slide, please. That's the citizen hearing. I'll come back to something on that. You know what? Let me go on with the story before I do the slides. So Colonel Holt goes back to the clearing where something was seen on the first night by Jim and John. And he's pretty skeptical, but while he's waiting for the light alls to come and they can't see anything, he thinks, well, let's investigate this site. Now, people had already been out there, but he wanted to see it for himself. And he saw, and actually, let's go on. I do have a photo. No, I don't have a photo. Okay. Let me go back. Okay. Well, okay. I do not have I thought I had a photo of the landing site. There is one out there on the internet somewhere. It may have been on my computer. Never mind. There is a low-quality black and white photo. It doesn't really show you much, but you can just about see someone in its Air Force uniform, somebody in British police uniform. They had to get the British civil police out there for complicated jurisdictional reasons associated with the NATO Status of Forces Act, etc. So Colonel Holt gets to the clearing, and sure enough, the first thing that he notices is that, yeah, the trees are all damaged, and just like they said, branches have been smashed off by something. But, you know, that's not that remarkable. Branches fall off trees from time to time. These things happen. He also saw indentations in the ground. 3 indentations in the shape of a triangle, and one dead in the center of those 3, a larger and slightly less profound indentation. And the ground at the time was frozen solid. I mean, this was England in December. And for those of you who've done England in December, particularly any of you who've been posted to any of those East Coast military bases where the wind comes in off the North Sea, you'll know that it's not a kind of climatically pleasant place to be. So Colonel Holt estimated that the object that made those indentations must have weighed several tons. The most critical piece of the puzzle, though, related to another individual that he'd taken out in the team, Munro Nevels. He was the disaster preparedness officer, and Munro Nevels had with him a Geiger counter. And Colonel Holt basically said, well, sweep the area, see if you pick up anything unusual. Along the sides of the trees facing the clearing, significantly high radiation levels were detected. And moreover, the trees on the inside faces of them, the sides of the trees facing inwards towards the clearing, they were literally burnt and blackened up to a certain height, and then no more. And he said it was as if something with a high heat source had almost burned the thing, and maybe only the fact that it was wet and cold had stopped a fire. So both visually, I mean literally seeing the charring on these trees, and with the Geiger counter, realizing that this was a kind of hot zone, they realized that they got something significant, and then the readings peaked in the 3 indentations in the ground, and the one in the center, right where this thing had landed. Later on, a report of these radiation readings was sent to the Ministry of Defense, and the MOD's secretive defense intelligence staff assessed these levels as being, quote, significantly higher than the average background, unquote. And that's a direct quote from a defense intelligence staff document. And unlike a lot of the documents that you sometimes see in ufology, like MJ12, the provenance of these documents is not disputed. They are the government's own documents from the government's own website. And although they're available elsewhere on the internet, you can read them on the Ministry of Defense and the National Archives website. And they come right out and say that these radiation levels are significantly higher than the average background. And that was from the MOD, or one of the MOD files on this. One other very interesting piece from the MOD files, and I'm just going to read one of those. Oh, okay. Let me just do the rest of the slides so that we can unplug this. This is the citizen hearing on disclosure, and you can see myself, Jim Peniston, now with beard, John Burroughs.
Want to make this bigger?
Okay.
That.
Will it come? Okay. Thanks. So that's us at the citizen hearing and disclosure. I'll maybe go back and say something about that. That's Project Condign. I'm going to talk about that. This Project Condign was a secret Defense Intelligence staff study on UFOs. And this slide, can we leave this up for a while? Because this is an important one. As many of you know, John Burroughs and Jim Penniston have health issues which they believe are attributable to their encounter with this UFO. For many years, they had been trying to get their medical records. They were told that they were in a classified records section of the VA. John and Jim had a claim with the VA. They have a lawyer, Pat Frascogna. Nothing was happening. And then the British Ministry of Defence unilaterally released, under the Freedom of Information Act, this highly classified study, codenamed Project Condign, secret UK eyes only, 468 pages. And no one really read it all the way through. And this quote was stuck away in one of the working papers somewhere near the end. And it's just worth reading it out loud. The well-reported Rendlesham Forest / Bent Waters event is an example where it might be postulated that several observers were probably exposed to UAP radiation for longer than normal UAP sighting periods. UAP is what we in the Ministry of Defence used instead of UFO, unidentified aerial phenomenon. Here is the American government for years denying that this happened or that there was an issue. Here is the British Ministry of Defence in a secret UK eyes only document coming out and saying this. John Burroughs' lawyer thought all his Christmases had come at once, and indeed they had. Because he went to the VA with that and said, by the way, have you seen this? And guess what? The VA settled in full, instantly, rolled over and settled because of that.
Were photographs taken in conjunction with the radiation?
Photographs were taken. Those photographs were taken, but all those involved were told subsequently that their photographs did not come out. This is the binary message. I'll come on to that in a little while. That is the decode, or one possible decode of the binary message, and that's the book. That's so that you can have your computer back.
Thank you. Go ahead. But you have a lot more to say.
Oh, hopefully.
Since we got a little bit late start because of the lack of an adapter, it's going to go into lunch, and if the speaker is willing to go a little extra over, then anybody can stay if they want.
You can go till 1:15
Okay.
if you want.
Okay. This was scheduled to finish at what? 12:30? Oh, so we've got at least another half hour. There's a question over there. Oh, sorry. Could you just wait for the microphone?
I'm sure that some of the servicemen that were exposed to the radiation today probably have some illness possibility. I'm sure she probably knows. Were there any illnesses reported, and are their medical records still intact?
It's a very important question. The VA have settled certainly in full with John. Jim, I think, is playing his cards fairly close to his chest on a lot of this. I'm not sure what he wants discussed, so I'll perhaps let him later this year talk about that. But both John and Jim have had health problems which they most definitely believe is attributable to their close proximity of this. John has certainly had heart problems that he believes was triggered by this. Jim has had problems too. Although the VA have settled in full, certainly with John, they have still not actually released the medical files and reports. And Pat Frascogna, by the way, who is another great hero of this, Pat Frascogna is an attorney who has done literally, I think, hundreds of hours of pro bono work on this for John and Jim to help them. Maybe if there's talk about maybe a class action later with some of the other witnesses I don't know how that's going to pan out. I'm not a lawyer. But yes, they have had health problems, and that was a big part of this. I apologize that because of the technical difficulties and the need to give back the computer and things, for which many thanks for that loan. Thank you. Okay, thank you. And I apologize that because of those technical difficulties, we've had to slightly not only start late, but do things a little bit out of order. And I hope that you'll forgive me for perhaps jumping backwards and forwards a little bit with this.
And for your edification, although the monitor, the display monitor is a little out of lip sync, the DVDs are not. It's just a little bit of a loop delay, so don't worry about it. They're going to come out okay.
Okay, and thank you for your hard work. I know it's been a nightmare for you trying to kind of sort out, like.
The gins we had a thing about the gins, so the gins were out. And,
oh, okay, but thank you to you as well for all the, I could not do that job. I mean, I'm such a technophobe. I'm just like, where does it plug in? But I know that unfortunately people have different types of laptops, different sizes, different operating systems, and it is pretty complicated. So thank you for your work, and thank you for your patience and forbearing with the situation. I want to just go back. So Colonel Holt and his team are in the clearing, and they get these radioactivity levels, and at that point, someone shouts out, "Wait, there's something through the trees." And that's the point where Colonel Holt actually sees a strange light himself. I don't have it with me, but he recorded all this on audio tape. And if you go to YouTube and just type in Holt tape, and it's Holt, H-A-L-T, there's about 17 or 18 minutes of audio tape. Colonel Holt was like the original Special Agent Dale Cooper. He took with him a handheld cassette recorder, and it was his common practice to document his thoughts and observations on this. So all the while, when this was going on, Colonel Holt was speaking into his microcassette, and then when he was giving orders and when maybe nothing was happening, he stopped, and then he started again. And Colonel Holt and his team were out in the forest and subsequently in the farmers' fields for about 2 or 3 hours, maybe more. And all this is condensed down to 17 minutes or so on this tape. But you can hear on this tape the tension, possibly even some fear in their voices as this thing is seen. And at one point, it's like it's coming this way. It's definitely coming this way. Weird, and at one point, this thing they see it first through the trees, but then it's up in the sky. And at one point, Colonel Holt saw a narrow beam of light firing down almost literally at his feet in front of him and his men. And in later years, speculating about this, he said, was this a weapon? Was this a warning? Was this communication? What was this? He didn't know. But clearly, for anyone who says that this kind of thing, UFOs, is of no defense significance or no defense interest, here we have the deputy base commander of one of the most strategically important bases in NATO in the middle of a UFO encounter, right next to the twin bases, with all this physical evidence. And I mean, I mentioned the marks on the trees. We have the released Ministry of Defense document that gives the assessment. This thing was briefly tracked on radar. Initially, when it was reported, maybe in terms of have we had a light aircraft crash, they checked with various bases, and they were told, well, there was a bogey, an uncorrelated radar target, briefly over the twin bases, and then it just disappeared from the screens. Does it mean that that was something that crashed, as they initially thought, or was that the landing of this thing actually tracked on radar? We don't know, but I mean, when I talk about Rendlesham Forest, when I say that it's the best evidenced and most compelling case that I think we have, I don't say that lightly. I talk about this as being almost a perfect storm of a UFO encounter. Every single thing that you could want to make a UFO case compelling in evidential terms comes together in this one case. It happens over multiple nights. It happens every time it happens, not as a fleeting instant, but over a period of some hours. It involves multiple witnesses. Many of those witnesses, in fact, most of the key ones on the record, are serving military officers. We have radar corroboration of this. We have the radiation readings from the disaster preparedness officer. We have the Ministry of Defense file released, or some of it. We have some United States Air Force documents, some of the witness statements and sketches released. We have a number of these people now on the record. So all of these things have come together, and yet there are still some things which have not come out. We know, for example, that soil samples were taken. We know that samples of bark from the damaged trees and sap were taken. Where did those go? Well, as it happens, we know. And we know because of a throwaway line in a fairly lowly classified Ministry of Defense memo sent early in 1981. And this document reads as follows. I have spoken with Squadron Leader Morland at Bentwaters, and he considers the Deputy Base Commander a sound source. Well, I don't know why they were even asking that question. And this is, by the way, from the Ministry of Defense radar experts, written to DS8. And it goes on to say, I asked if the incident had been reported on the USAF net, and I was advised that the tape recorders of the event, of the evidence, had been handed to General Gabriel, who happened to be visiting the station. And then it goes on to say, in a remarkable piece of British understatement, perhaps it would be reasonable to ask if we could have tape recordings as well. In other words, the British government was absolutely furious that the American authorities had taken items relating to this out of the country without informing us and without sharing this with us. And in case you're wondering who General Gabriel was, he was Commander-in-Chief, United States Air Force in Europe, CNC USAFE. So wait a minute, you might ask yourself, don't we have a little bit of a disconnect here? The public position of the United States Air Force, the DoD, and indeed the US government more generally, the public position, when anyone asks, media public, is, we're not interested in UFOs anymore. We don't investigate. Project Blue Book was shut down in 1969. After that, nothing. And yet, we have the most senior United States Air Force officer in Europe flying to the bases to be briefed on this, taking items pertaining to the investigation back to his headquarters in Ramstein, Germany. What happened to that material? Do we even know? Do we have a full inventory of what CNC USAFE was given? No, we don't. Do we know what analyses happened afterwards? Who conducted them? What they concluded? We do not. Do we know what happened to that material? What is its final disposition? Did it end up back with the DoD or the USAF headquarters in continental United States, or did it go to some other agency? Again, we don't know. The trail goes cold in Ramstein. We can track, from looking at the Ministry of Defense documents, that the incident took place. That CNC Yousefi flew in, he was briefed, he was given items, flew back to Ramstein. After that, nobody, no journalist, no UFO researcher using the Freedom of Information Act, nobody has been able to determine what happened next. It's as if the whole thing has disappeared off the face of the earth, maybe literally. Mm-hmm.
Wait for the mic.
Yeah, I'm waiting.
I'll come.
Can you go over the binary code, because that thing is driving me
Sure.
crazy right now.
Okay.
And I think everyone's really wanting to know about that. And
Okay.
then also, like, after that, after knowing Jim, do you think that he's glad that this happened to him? After you know, looking back
No.
at 35 years, is he glad that this happened to him?
I'm going to, as I did with an earlier question, I'm going to answer the second question first. Is Jim glad? No. If he could wind back the clock and it would, somebody else would, well, he's too good a man to wish that on someone else. But if he could have it not happen, he would have it not happen. This thing kind of ruined his life, in a sense. I mean, physically, emotionally, there are all sorts of things. And I showed that slide up there, and I gave it the somewhat glib title, Smiley Happy People. But none of these people are particularly comfortable with this. I don't think John's comfortable with it. Colonel Holt, he's not in a good place. He's kind of, pretty angry about all this and the way that the people... No, none, some people... I think somebody asked, I heard at the amphitheater, somebody asked Travis Walton, I think, how he felt about that. And, yeah, I think he's got kind of mixed feelings. I mean, in a sense, maybe he knows things and has met more interesting people as a result of this. But, I mean, as to what happened to him at the time, he wouldn't wish that on his worst enemy. No, Jim did not want this. He said this thing was career suicide. He said if he'd have talked about this, certainly to the extent that he does now, it would have been over. But let me talk about the binary code. When Jim touched the side of the craft, and when he touched that final symbol that was illuminated, a big flash, he received kind of like, it was almost like a flash into his brain. The way he tries to rationalize this now, the way he characterizes it sometimes, is he had a kind of telepathic download of information. Something flashed into his mind. And for some hours, and indeed days, he set that aside. And then a few days later, at home, he was going through his notes, and suddenly, as if under a compulsion, he just wrote. And he wrote pages and pages of ones and zeros. And then he kind of promptly forgot about it, suppressed it, repressed it for years. Now, there were a couple of reasons for this. Firstly, he said this was career suicide. He said it was just about okay to say, I've seen a strange craft in the forest because heck, the deputy base commander's seen it, whatever it is too. So suddenly, the moment Colonel Holt sees this thing, it's kind of okay for the more junior people to say, yeah, we saw a UFO. They don't use the phrase UFO. They just saw we saw something we couldn't explain. We saw the radar people talk in terms of uncorrelated targets. The people who actually saw this thing, said we saw an unidentified craft. Everyone kind of in government and the military sometimes downplays their language on this. Even Colonel Holt's famous memo to the Ministry of Defense is just given the innocuous title, Unexplained Lights. Well, hello, it's not unexplained lights, it's a landed metallic craft, as he goes on to say in the memo. But the title has to be something kind of bland. Yeah, sanitized. So part of it was that Jim, particularly being on the PRP, knew that this was career suicide. To say he'd seen a UFO, just about okay. To say that I had a telepathic download of ones and zeros, he'd have been out of that door and off base, pretty darn quick. So he kept it to himself. But the other reason he kept it to himself is he really didn't know what he had, and he didn't really think that it was anything particularly significant. He was not familiar with binary code. It was just not his specialism. And the other thing is, if we are to believe, as many do, that what was going on here involves an intelligence of some kind, might that intelligence itself not have played a role in deciding how the information and when the information and by who the information would come out? Everything is probably running to a timetable. Everything is running to a plan. And there's a reason for all of this, and it will come out when it comes out. And so John did some work with Linda Moulton Howe, had some regression hypnosis, some things came up. Then later on, teamed up with myself and John Burroughs. We wrote this book. There's a group of researchers looking at the binary code. Some of you have come across a possible interpretation of this. Could the binary code be a message? If it's a message, is it a message from extraterrestrials? Is it a message from the future? Is it a message from interdimensional entities of some sort? None of us know. I mean, none of us who are involved in this, either as witnesses or researchers, presume to be so arrogant as to say, hey people, this is what it is. You get Jim and John, and they're the first to say, look, we just lived this. We don't have all the answers for you, but what we can try to do is put out our recollections and our information, and if people want to use that and take it forward, then they're free to do. Now, some time ago, John and Jim did, they did Ancient Aliens. And the show got a computer programmer called Nick Sisk to try and run this binary code, these 16 pages of ones and zeros, just through a binary code, through a decoder and see what they could come up with. And the message that you will have seen on Ancient Aliens, it was up on the slide, but I'll just read the pertinent textual points from here. There are some numbers too. Exploration of humanity, continuous for planetary advance, eyes of your eyes, origin year 8100. And there's a series of what look to be latitudinal and longitudinal coordinates, which just so happen to coincide with sites of great spiritual significance and power. Sedona in Arizona, the Great Pyramid in Giza, the Nazca Lines in Peru, the Temple of Apollo in Naxos, Greece, all these sites, and the so-called mythical lost continent of High Brazil, sometimes called the Celtic Atlantis. And then these other things. Well, I'm afraid to say that the number 666 is in there as well. Some people believe that this is demonic. The phrase origin year 8100 gets in there. And it gets in there actually twice, once at the beginning, once at the end. I don't know much about code breaking, but I do know that sometimes you put something at the beginning and something at the end, and that's an important part of it. Now, I have no, desire to denigrate the good work that Ancient Aliens, History Channel, Prometheus Productions, and Nick Sisk did on any of this. The message is what it is. But I think it's a red herring. It's an attention getter. I mean, in a sense, all those sites, doesn't that read to you almost like some kind of, I call it New Age buzzword bingo. It's every spiritual person, every New Age person's kind of holiday wish list. It's their bucket list. I want to do Egypt. I want to do the Nazca lines. I want to do the Temple of Apollo. I want, all these things. I think it's a little bit too obvious. One thing I do know about codes is that sometimes there's a deeper message. Sometimes you have to look much deeper in. And that is what's going on now. And there are some people who are doing this with Jim and his knowledge. There are other people out there doing it for themselves. I mean, the data is out there. You can buy the book, but I'm not trying to sell this to you. You can read it for free on the internet too. It's out there. And so lots of people are doing their own thing, trying to find out what they can. Yeah, there's a question over there. Oh, can we wait for the microphone?
This has happened to me before during contact, getting downloaded telepathic codes and encrypted messages that to me at the time when I had the experience and now I felt that I was reading my own Akashic records.
That many people, whether they're abductees, contactees, experiencers, whether they're channelers, many people receive what they believe to be messages, and I'm sure there's an awful lot of good information out there. What I'd like to see, and maybe some people are working on this, is almost like a central repository for a lot of this, where people can come together. Because, just to round off my previous comment there, what's happening now is that a multidisciplinary group of people are coming together. Computer programmers, code breakers, mathematicians, esoteric researchers. They're all trying to pool their knowledge and their specific areas of research. And they're all trying to come together on Jim's binary message. And maybe those sorts of people could work on the sorts of material that you and other people are getting too. So now, Jim has been rather more private over recent months than John. John's been very fired up about this. He's been very bullish about his struggle with the VA. You saw that slide. You may have seen it. It's amazing, actually, how little, and it's quite depressing, how little mainstream media news coverage there was of this. Hello, isn't this a big story? A serving United States officer encountered a UFO on duty, believes his health problems are attributable to that. The VA deny his claim. The British government publish a secret report into UFOs that says, yeah, they were probably irradiated. The VA roll over and fold and settle in full, no questions asked. And not one US mainstream media outlet runs a story. One British newspaper, the Daily Mirror, ran a story on it. And that was about it. Now, some people may say that that's a conspiracy. Others may just say it's the sad state of this subject that with so much, being perfectly honest, bogus and crazy information out there, when you get the good stuff, it just gets gets kind of drowned out. It's the classic, it's the age-old signal-to-noise ratio problem that this subject has. Or is it also that old adage that the best place to hide a book is in a library? Because none of this is secret. Like I say, I'm not a whistleblower with any of this. I'm not breaking my secrecy oath. Those documents that have been released are on the National Archives website. The codes, yeah, they're in the book, but they're out there on several sites, absolutely free. So I mean, I would encourage, I don't know what the Rendlesham message will say. But if anyone's got any ideas, please share them.
It felt to me also as though it was part of a DNA activation, and whether it be from future and past life information. That's how I felt.
Well, it's interesting because a few years ago, I mean, Jim Penniston has made no secret of the fact that certainly at one time he strongly favored the time travel theory. And while he is not definitive about any of this, I mean, he would not presume to say this is what it was. He doesn't know. But he was attracted by the time travel theory. And then when you have things like origin year 8100, that would suggest it. Now, there's one absolutely intriguing point about this. A few years ago, time travel would have been dismissed as science fiction. Actually, interdimensional things would have been dismissed as science fiction. Now, scientists at the Large Hadron Collider have made no secret of the fact that one of the things they want to do with the Large Hadron Collider, they want to probe the secrets of the universe in terms of answering questions like what happened before the Big Bang. And I know that the word before is a tautology in that sense, but forgive me that. I don't have the physics for it. They want to probe dark matter, but one of the other things they want to do is probe for evidence of the hidden dimensions that certainly some theoretical physics, like string theory, say must be there for the theoretical physics to work. So we've got this there's always, of course, this dogfight between theoretical physics and observational physics. But scientists are talking quite openly about the fact that these hidden dimensions are something that they really do want to go after. So when skeptics or debunkers or whoever sort of dismiss this sort of talk and say it's all science fiction, oh no it isn't. Oh no it isn't. And the same with time travel. There are now people such as Professor Ronald Mallett who are doing very good work on this. Now, Ronald Mallett, interestingly, published a piece where he said, if you wanted to send a message back into the past, you would do it with radioactive material, and then it would decay, and depending on which way it's spinning, you would get effectively either a positive spin or a negative spin through the radioactive decay. Now, what is a positive or a negative? It's a 1 or a 0. It's a binary. So Professor Ronald Mallett came out and said, quite independently, I mean, Jim had no idea who this professor was, and yet Professor Mallett is saying, if this was ever possible, you would send a binary code message into the past. That would really be the only way you could communicate, and you would do it through radioactive decay. What do we find? At the Rendlesham Forest landing site, evidence of radioactivity. What do we find through Jim? 1s and 0s. Is there a connection? Yes, I think there is. Is there going to be a deeper message that we will find? I certainly hope so. I mean, if I had still been at the Ministry of Defence, I would have gotten GCHQ, which is British equivalent of NSA, supercomputers working on that. One thing about submitting the manuscript for this, for security clearance, is that we know they got the codes. So we'll give it to them. We don't mind. You know, we'd like someone to solve the message. And if government solves it, well, good for them.
So knowing that, why do you say it's a red herring?
No, pardon me, I misspoke. I think that the exploration of humanity continuous for planetary advance message, it may be just an attention getter. What I'm saying is that may or may not be true in terms of significance. But what I think it's doing is it's saying to people, there is an intelligence here. This is not just a random string of ones and zeros. Maybe it's trying to attract and interest the very people, some of whom are sitting in this room, who would be most interested in this and who would be most able and most compelled to take forward an investigation on it. So what I'm saying is, maybe I misspoke by saying it's a red herring. It's more a sort of an attention getter. But I think that deeper in, there will be, remember the movie Contact? The attention getter was the string of prime numbers. But that wasn't really the message. A string of prime numbers really is only a beacon. If we pick up a string of prime numbers with a radio telescope, all it really tells us is there's a civilization out there, because this doesn't happen naturally. The real message is much deeper in. So that's what I meant. Yes, over there.
It may seem trivial in the grand scheme of things, but it seems like, from my observations personally and otherwise with the VA, that it's standard operating procedure. A friend of mine who was a pilot in Vietnam is still going through Agent Orange with the VA as we speak today to get approval for disability from that. So, and my own personal friends with experience with my father, the VA stonewalls everything possible. It's just SOP.
Right. I mean, certainly, thank you. Certainly, I'm aware that the VA has got a very bad press of late, and it seems to me that quite a lot of that is probably justified. I know that it became such a political topic that from the very top downwards, people have said, this is broken, we need to fix it. I must here, incidentally, pay tribute to both Senators McCain and Senator Kyle, both of whom did a lot of work personally to help John Burroughs and Jim Penniston with this. And so both John Kyle and Senator McCain do I think, sometimes we demonize the politicians over this, but both Senator McCain and Senator McKyle have worked very hard on John and Jim's behalf on this. And indeed, at the citizen hearing on disclosure, you heard about that from Steve Bassett. Some of you were probably there. The former congressional representatives, some Republican, some Democrat, some Libertarian, were so outraged by John and Jim's inability to get their records and their treatment more generally that they authored a letter to the President of the United States. And again, I'm not sure that that letter has been that widely published on the internet. It probably is out there somewhere, but it's in the back of the book somewhere. It's the very last thing. It was dated May 3rd, 2013, addressed to the President of the United States and signed by people like Merrill Cook, who is here and is a huge hero of this subject, by the way, and has done such a lot. Roscoe Bartlett, Darlene Hooley, Caroline Kilpatrick, Mike Gravel, and Lynn Woolsey. All of them put their signatures to a letter to the President, copied to the head of the VA, and basically said, please get this sorted for John and Jim.
Thank you. I don't know if this is working or not.
Yes.
Yeah. I had a comment and a quick question. I think we do all possess part of this puzzle, and it's wonderful that we have the opportunity to come together and share different facets and information. I don't know how many people are aware, or if you're aware or made the connection between the crop circles and RFI that in 2002 there was, I believe, a crabwood crop circle that started out being decoded that said exploration of humanity as well. And then so many years later, it's coming up again in 2010 with Linda Moulton Howe. I was just wondering who, if this is not like a conscious intellectual beings or whatever from other dimensions, who would you feel, in your best estimate, could be responsible for throwing us off or misleading us, or if we're truth seekers all entertaining the same idea and following the Rendlesham Code? I'm just wondering who would go to this extent,
and who could,
and for what purpose, and who could be this involved. I just wanted to state for anybody that's totally disbelieving, and I came from Pennsylvania to be here. My friends from Ohio were both former teachers. We're not real woo-woo out there people, but we did go to the coordinate in Sedona, where we both, it was a very powerful point, and it is in direct correlation with a pyramid. And we did stand there and feel a very strong gravitational pull, and also saw one of the people in our party be pulled on an angle that was very bizarre. So do you entertain the idea that these coordinates could be portals for any type of interdimensional travel?
They could be, and what I would say to people is, hey, if it works for you, don't wait for the government to give you an answer. Go out and find one for yourselves. And if people want to visit these sites, hey, if nothing at all happens, you'll have a great time. They're all wonderful places. I don't think anyone ever went to these places and sort of came away disappointed. I mean, time in Sedona sounds like a good thing. I tend to be more skeptical about many of the crop circles, but again, there may be a connection. And here's another interesting thing. If there's a message, who's to say who it's for? I mean, is it for the government? No. I suspect if there is a message, it's for anyone who wants to listen. So if that message has spoken to you personally, and you've already derived some enjoyment and some interest from it, well, that's a pretty good kind of message. If we ever receive a message from extraterrestrials or from the future, I don't know that it's going to be, hey, here's free energy and here's the cancer cure or whatever. That might be nice, but that might not be the way the universe works. Maybe it's just a message, a more personal message for anyone who can listen. And you know what? Even though there was a marvelous quote very recently in the papers, and I'm going to close with this because I think I'm pretty much out of time. I'm down to 2 minutes now. So I'm going to close with this. I don't know what the Rendlesham message says. I don't know if we'll decode it. I don't know if radio telescopes will pick up a message from space. And if they do, whether it will be a message or just a beacon. But even if it's just a beacon, even if it is just the string of prime numbers that we saw on the movie Contact, that in of itself would be a truly wonderful thing. Because as I believe Seth Shostak said in a recent interview, it would be like a message to the universe saying, hey, it's not just you, you're not alone, there are people out there, we've gotten past some of the problems that you're probably facing, there is hope. And with that note, I'll close. Thank you very much indeed.